My name is Lester King, and on the night I celebrated selling my life's work for $32 million, I watched my daughter-in-law slip something into my wine. I wasn't supposed to notice. I did. What came next wasn't a shouting match or a fistfight. It was a quiet decision that would expose who truly loved me and who only loved my money. I changed glasses when no one was looking. A single choice 3 seconds long turned a family celebration into a test of character that some of us failed in front of everyone. Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from and how old you are. Please subscribe to Family Betrayal Unmasked to hear more powerful stories like this one. I had just signed the contracts that ended 32 years of my life's work. $32 million sat in black and white ink, the kind of figure that should have bought me peace. Instead, my son stormed into my office demanding $5 million as if it were owed to him by birthright. His fist slammed the desk so hard, the coffee mug jumped, spilling across the papers that had once carried my dreams. My heart sank deeper than the stain spreading across those reports. Because what hurt wasn't the demand, it was the look in his eyes. It wasn't pride or love. It was hunger, raw greed staring back at me from my own flesh and blood. "Dad, what's $5 million to you?" Dennis sneered. "You've got 32. "That's nothing." His voice cracked in frustration, a man nearly 40 still sounding like a teenager, convinced the world cheated him. I tried to remind him of the sacrifices, the nights I tucked him in after working 18 hours, the plays and games I missed, to keep food on the table after his mother died. But he didn't hear it. To him, my company wasn't a legacy, it was a lottery ticket he felt entitled to cash. Behind him, Wendy leaned against the doorframe. Her eyes glittered in a way that made my skin crawl, not with admiration, but calculation. She nodded when Dennis looked her way, silent approval for his ultimatum. My own daughter-in-law, the woman who had sworn to stand beside my son, stood instead as his accomplice in greed. "Maybe we can discuss this calmly," she said sweetly, but her tone was as sharp as broken glass. I saw through it. She wasn't calming the fire. She was stoking it. When I told Dennis no, that this money was my security, my retirement, his laugh was bitter enough to cut. "Then don't expect us for dinners, holidays, or anything else. If you don't give me what I deserve, don't expect us at your party either." His words weren't just threats. They were a knife carving away at the family I thought I still had. For a moment I looked at him and wondered where my little boy had gone. The one who once carried my briefcase with pride, saying he wanted to be just like me. That boy had vanished, replaced by a man who measured love in dollar signs. The office fell silent after the door slammed shut, the echo rattling the windows of the house I'd built with my own hands. Through the blinds, I saw the taillights of his BMW flare red as he tore away Wendy beside him, with her phone already to her ear. Planning. Always planning. I sat alone, the contracts heavy in my hands, wondering how 32 years of sacrifice had raised a son who saw me as nothing more than an ATM. That night I realized something chilling. The first betrayal in my retirement wasn't from strangers or rivals. It came from my own blood, in the very room where I'd built everything for us both. The next morning, I expected to feel lighter. After all the sale was done, the years of grinding finally behind me. But instead of joy, there was a hollow ache in my chest. $32 million should have meant freedom. Yet all I could think of was the way Dennis's voice had cracked with anger, the way Wendy's eyes had lingered on the contracts, like a hawk circling prey. It wasn't pride they carried for me. It was resentment that I had succeeded without them, and hunger for what they believed they deserved. I poured myself a cup of coffee and tried to settle into the silence of the house. The walls seemed too still, as though they too had heard my son declare that family dinners, holidays, even Sunday afternoons together were disposable if money wasn't handed over. That was his punishment for me daring to say no. I thought of the years I had built traditions, barbecues in the backyard, birthdays marked with cake and laughter, Christmas mornings when Dennis was little and believed in magic. All of it suddenly felt like a fragile illusion shattered by one demand. The phone rang, a sharp sound that jolted me back. I almost hoped it was Dennis calling to apologize, to tell me last night had been a terrible mistake. Instead, it was Jim Patterson, my old rival and friend, his voice warm with congratulations. 32 million, Lester. You magnificent devil, he laughed. His joy for me was genuine, untainted by expectation, and it made the contrast with Dennis even starker. Friends, I realized, could be more steadfast than blood. Still, I invited Dennis and Wendy to the retirement party I'd been planning. Bring Wendy's parents too, I said, forcing my voice into calm. Let's celebrate properly. I'll explain my plans for retirement then. Maybe if I framed it not as a handout, but as part of a bigger vision, they'd see reason. But I also knew it was a gamble. Greed rarely listens to reason. That evening, as I finalized catering details, I caught myself glancing at the empty chair across the dining table. It should have been Dennis sitting there, asking about my new chapter, maybe offering a toast to the father who had sacrificed so much. Instead, all I saw in my mind was his clenched jaw, his fist hitting the desk, and Wendy's knowing smirk behind him. I asked myself the question no parent ever wants to ask: where had I gone wrong? Was it in giving him too much or not giving enough? Did my long hours away from home teach him that love could be substituted with money? I told myself the party would answer everything. Surrounded by friends who had walked with me through failure and triumph, Dennis would see that life wasn't about what you could extract, but what you could contribute. Maybe he'd understand. Maybe he wouldn't. But either way, the celebration would go on. Because this was my moment, and I wasn't going to let entitlement destroy it. I woke the following day with a restless weight pressing down on me. The house was quiet, too quiet, as though it held its breath after the storm Dennis had left behind. I moved to my office where the signed contracts lay neatly stacked, bound in a leather folder. $32 million. To the world, it was triumph. To me, it was supposed to be a reward, the chance to rest after 3 decades of sacrifice. Yet I couldn't ignore the echo of Dennis's demand, $5 million spoken like a debt I owed him. The irony was cruel. I had built King Technologies from nothing, starting in this very room when Dennis was still a boy in a race car bed upstairs. Back then, he'd peek his head around the door, eyes wide with curiosity, asking Dad, "What are you building?" He used to carry my briefcase like it was a treasure, declaring he'd help me run the company one day. Those memories clashed hard with the man I'd seen yesterday, his voice dripping with entitlement, his wife nodding encouragement at every harsh word. I stood at the window, staring at the lawn where Dennis once played catch with his grandfather. The sunlight touched every corner of the yard, but it couldn't reach the darker thought gnawing at me my son had been drifting for years. Job to job, scheme to scheme, always one step away from disaster. And when Wendy came into the picture, those demands multiplied. Bigger apartment, flashier car, investments that somehow always needed urgent funding. She had turned his restlessness into full-blown entitlement. I tried to push the bitterness away, telling myself that maybe last night had been nothing more than desperation. Debt makes people do foolish things. Maybe if I extended an olive branch at the party, Dennis would finally understand. Friends would be there, men and women who had seen the real struggle, who could remind him that wealth wasn't won overnight. Perhaps standing in that room would humble him, Remind him that success came from years of discipline, not just inheritance. But even as I tried to reassure myself, I couldn't forget the look in Wendy's eyes. Calculated, cold, as though she were tallying my worth and planning her next move. She had said almost nothing in my office, yet her silence spoke volumes. It was her hand on Dennis's arm, her slight nod, that drove his ultimatum deeper. My gut told me her presence at the party wouldn't be to celebrate, but to calculate. I walked back to the desk, placed my hand on the leather folder of contracts, and felt its weight. This was my life's work, not a handout, not a gift for those who hadn't earned it. A part of me grieved, realizing that Dennis no longer saw me as his father, but as a walking vault. Still, I refused to crumble. The party would go forward. If anything, it would show me the truth, whether my son still had any loyalty left, or whether greed had finally consumed him entirely. By Friday evening, the house hummed with preparations. The caterers confirmed the final menu, the florist promised fresh arrangements, and the staff set up the terrace with white linens and polished glassware. To anyone else, it might have looked like the perfect beginning of retirement, a man surrounded by beauty, ready to enjoy the fruits of his labor. But beneath the surface, I carried the heaviness of uncertainty. Would Dennis and Wendy show up to celebrate, or would they arrive with sharpened demands, masked as smiles? I poured myself a simple glass of wine. Nothing special, just something to take the edge off, and sat in the leather armchair by the fireplace. The family photograph on the mantel caught my eye. There I was, younger and leaner, standing at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for King Technology's first real office building. Beside me, Dennis, at 10 years old, grinned wide, holding my hand, like he believed I could do anything. That boy looked proud of me. That boy wanted to stand in my shoes. Somewhere between that day and now, admiration had curdled into resentment. I couldn't help but ask myself, had I created this monster? I gave Dennis opportunities, paid for his education, tried to guide him. But I also worked punishing hours, often choosing late-night meetings over Little League games, quarterly deadlines over father-son camping trips. I told myself it was for him, for his future, but now I wondered if what I'd really taught him was that money was the only measure of love. And with Wendy whispering in his ear, that twisted lesson had become a weapon. The phone buzzed on the side table, cutting through my thoughts. A message from Dennis: Wendy's parents want to meet you before the party. Can we come by at 6? I stared at the words for a long moment. Homer and Mai Thompson were decent people, the kind who carried Midwest humility in their voices. Teachers, homemakers, ordinary folks. I doubted they had any idea what kind of plans their daughter had been nurturing since marrying my son. Still, the request unsettled me. Why meet before the party? Why now? I typed back slowly. Of course, you're welcome at 7 with everyone else. My thumb hovered over the send button before finally pressing it. If they wanted to play their games, they would have to do it on my terms. I stood and walked to the terrace, where the early evening air carried the scent of fresh roses and cut grass. For a moment, I tried to picture the party as it was meant to be, a celebration of survival, perseverance, and hard-won success. Guests raising glasses, old friends telling stories of the lean years, laughter echoing under the stars. That was the image I wanted to carry into retirement, not the bitterness of family betrayal. Yet, as I looked back through the French doors into the quiet of my house, a chill ran through me. I knew Wendy well enough to understand she wouldn't let last night's refusal rest. She would come with a smile, with polished charm, but behind it would be strategy. And I would be ready. Because what she hadn't counted on was that 30 years in business had taught me one thing above all: never let your guard down, not even among family. Saturday arrived with clear skies, the kind of day that should have marked nothing but joy. Sunlight streamed through the windows, glinting off polished silverware and freshly ironed linens. Susan, the event coordinator, had transformed my terrace into something worthy of a magazine cover. White draped tables, candles, arranged with meticulous care, the soft hum of jazz floating through hidden speakers. From the outside, it was perfect. But inside, I carried a storm. By mid-afternoon, the guest list had grown to nearly 50 names, every one of them people who had walked with me through decades of struggle. Colleagues, neighbors, friends who had loaned me advice or sometimes money when I needed it most. These were the people who knew what 32 million meant. They understood that it wasn't a lottery win, but the final harvest of years sown with sweat, sacrifice, and faith. They would celebrate me for what I had built, not for what they could take. Still, I couldn't shake the tension in my chest. Every time the phone buzzed, I half expected another message from Dennis. I imagined him pacing in his kitchen, Wendy whispering in his ear, planning how to turn my party into their payday. Yet when the messages came, they were from Jim Patterson checking on wine selections, or from Martha asking if she could bring her famous pie. Those texts comforted me more than I realized. They reminded me that real loyalty existed outside bloodlines. At 5 o'clock, I walked the perimeter of the terrace, checking every detail as though preparing for battle. I straightened chairs, adjusted flowers, and made sure the leather portfolio containing the signed contracts was displayed in my study. Some guests would want to see them proof that the deal was real, proof that after 3 decades, Lester King had finally cashed out. As I laid my hand on the folder, I felt a flicker of pride, but also fear. What if Wendy saw it as her prize? The doorbell chimed at 6:30, sharp and bright. I inhaled deeply, bracing myself. Through the frosted glass, I spotted Jim and Martha, their smiles genuine, their arms already reaching for an embrace. Relief washed through me. The first guests were friends, not predators. "Lester, you magnificent devil," Jim boomed, nearly lifting me off my feet with a hug. For a moment, laughter filled the air, and the ache inside me loosened. One by one, guests arrived, neighbors who still remembered my garage, startup bankers, who once doubted I'd succeed, doctors who had patched me up through stress-induced scares. They clinked glasses, shared stories, and filled the house with warmth. Yet as I raised my champagne flute and looked across the glowing terrace, I couldn't ignore the shadow lingering in the back of my mind. Would Dennis and Wendy come through that door with sincere smiles, or with sharpened knives hidden behind charm I didn't know? But I did know this: if they arrived with betrayal in their hearts, they would find me ready. Because I had spent my whole life preparing for battles, and retirement wasn't going to begin with surrender. The party had reached its rhythm when it happened. Laughter rose from the terrace, glasses clinked, and warm conversations swirled like the jazz drifting through the air. I excused myself for a phone call, stepping into the study, where the leather-bound contracts sat proudly displayed. Harold, my attorney, needed to confirm wire transfer details for Monday morning. My mind was on logistics, not danger, until a flicker of movement caught my eye through the wide window overlooking the bar. There, standing with practiced ease, was Wendy. Her black dress shimmered under the candlelight, her smile fixed, as if painted on. But her hands betrayed her. I watched her slip something from her purse, a small packet almost invisible under the dim lights. She glanced around, her eyes darting with precision, ensuring no one was watching. Except I was. My breath caught as her fingers opened the packet and tipped it over my wineglass. A fine powder dissolved into the red liquid, and with a casual stir of the cocktail stick, she turned celebration into attempted murder. For a moment, the world shrank to that single glass. I heard Harold speaking on the line, his voice muffled, distant. "Poison my mind," screamed. One sip, and I would have collapsed on the floor in front of friends who would have thought it a heart attack, a tragic but believable end for a man of 65. The perfect cover story. Wendy's plan was smooth, calculated, almost elegant, but she had made one mistake she didn't know I was watching. I forced myself to respond to Harold, my voice steady though my pulse raced. Yes, Monday morning will work for the transfer. Thank you. I hung up before my trembling hands could betray me. Through the glass, I saw Wendy rejoin the guests, her laughter chiming at the right moments, her posture poised like an actress nailing her role. Only I knew the truth, that my own daughter-in-law had tried to kill me for money she believed she deserved. I stood frozen, torn between storming out to confront her and biding my time. 30 years in business had taught me the value of patience. Confrontation too early, and you lose leverage. Play it smart, and you turn the trap back on the predator. I breathed deeply, reminding myself that I had already survived one betrayal, Dennis's demand for $5 million. This was worse, but it would end the same way, on my terms. Returning to the terrace, I wore the same smile I had worn all evening, masking the fire inside. Wendy glanced toward the drink table, her eyes glimmering with expectation. She thought the stage was set for my downfall. What she didn't realize was that I now held every advantage. Because once you know the poison is there, it no longer has power over you. The game had shifted, and for the first time that night, I felt in control. Wendy's timing was impeccable. As I returned to the terrace, she clapped her hands lightly and said with a cheerful tone, "Shouldn't we have a proper toast to Lester's retirement?" The suggestion seemed innocent enough to the unknowing guests, but I could hear the urgency beneath her polished words. She wanted that poisoned wine in my hand, wanted to see me lift it to my lips. My friends cheered the idea. Jim Patterson, always ready with a glass in hand, nodded. Absolutely, this moment deserves champagne and speeches. Several guests turned toward the bar, where my wine glass waited like a silent executioner. Wendy's eyes flickered there too, a glint of anticipation she tried to disguise as enthusiasm. I smiled and nodded, hiding the hammering in my chest. Of course, I said smoothly. But first, Dennis, Wendy, could you help me fetch something special from the kitchen? I have a 1996 Dom Perignon that deserves the right crystal flutes. It was a calculated move, buying myself time while shifting the spotlight. Dennis's face lit up with pride at being included, but Wendy hesitated for just a fraction of a second. Her perfect mask nearly cracked. Still, she followed him inside, no doubt eager to keep her husband unaware of what she had just done. As the two disappeared through the French doors, I turned casually to Homer, her father, who sat near the bar. "How's retirement treating you?" I asked, stepping closer, forcing calm into my tone. Homer's face softened, eager to talk about teaching after 35 years. He leaned forward, animated, speaking of classroom stories and travel plans with his wife. Meanwhile, my eyes were on the table. There were 2 glasses of wine, nearly identical, just inches apart. Mine tainted with Wendy's powder and Homer's untouched. No one else noticed as I reached, casually sliding Homer's safe glass toward my place and nudging my poisoned glass into his spot. The motion took less than 3 seconds, disguised by a nod and a polite chuckle at Homer's story. No one raised an eyebrow. The switch was complete. My pulse slowed, relief seeping into my bones. I had turned Wendy's carefully laid trap against her. The irony was sharp. She had poisoned me, and now the deadly drink sat in front of her own father, completely unsuspecting. Dennis and Wendy emerged a few minutes later. Dennis carrying the champagne with pride, Wendy balancing the flutes like a gracious hostess. Her eyes darted immediately to the bar, and a smile of quiet satisfaction curved her lips. She believed the glass still waited for me, believed the poison was moments from doing its work. "Perfect timing," I announced, moving toward the crowd with deliberate ease. "Let's make this toast memorable." Guests gathered in a semicircle, laughter bubbling, glasses raised in anticipation. Wendy positioned herself carefully where she could watch me, her gaze never leaving that glass she thought held my fate. But it no longer held me hostage. I lifted the untainted wine instead, smiling directly at her. She didn't yet realize it, but her entire plan had just unraveled. The terrace hushed as I stepped forward with the glass in my hand. Candlelight flickered across expectant faces, friends who had come to honor my life's work. Yet beneath the warmth of their smiles, I could feel Wendy's eyes drilling into me, hungry for the moment she believed would be my undoing. She thought she was seconds away from watching me collapse, the poison doing its silent work, while everyone else chalked it up to age or a failing heart. Friends, I began, my voice calm, but carrying across the garden this evening is the most meaningful of my life. A ripple of applause rose and glasses lifted higher. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Homer pick up the glass that had once been mine. My stomach tightened. One more second, and he would have sealed his fate. "Homer, wait," I said suddenly, raising my free hand. The tone of my voice startled the crowd. Every head turned as he froze the rim of the glass just inches from his lips. Wendy's smile faltered, the color draining from her face. She knew. She knew I had seen what she had done. I took a slow step forward, the weight of silence pressing down on the gathering. "Don't drink that wine. It isn't safe." Gasps echoed through the terrace, startled laughter fading into confusion. Homer lowered the glass, his brow furrowed, glancing from me to his daughter. "What are you talking about, Lester?" he asked, his voice trembling. I let the moment breathe, then spoke with the certainty of a man who had nothing to lose. While I was inside on the phone, I saw Wendy add something to my glass. A powder. She stirred it in, believing no one was watching. The words landed like thunder. Martha Patterson clutched her husband's arm, eyes wide. Dr. Chen shook her head in disbelief. "That's ridiculous," Wendy snapped, her voice pitched high with panic. "Why would I ever poison anyone? You must have misin." But her protest rang hollow. Her face betrayed her tight jaw, darting eyes, hands gripping her champagne flute too tightly. Dennis looked at her, his confusion raw, his lips parting as if he wanted to defend her, but couldn't find the words. "Wendy, tell him he's wrong. Tell everyone this is some misunderstanding," he pleaded. But she only shook her head too quickly, her composure slipping further with every second. I turned to the crowd, my gaze firm. If I were wrong, why would she panic the moment I stopped Homer? Why would she look like the world just fell apart? Silence followed, thick with realization. The truth was sinking in. The sweet, charming daughter-in-law, who had flitted around the party with smiles and compliments, had just been unmasked as something far darker. For the first time all evening, I saw fear in Wendy's eyes, not for me, but for herself. She knew her plan had failed, and worse, she knew I had shifted the entire room against her. The air on the terrace grew heavy, thick with disbelief. Friends who had moments ago been laughing now stood rigid, eyes darting between me and Wendy. I could hear the fountain's steady trickle behind me, but even that soothing sound seemed muted by the weight of accusation. Wendy's mask cracked further as the silence stretched. "You looked around before you did it," I said, my voice steady but sharp as steel. "You made sure no one was watching." But I was. I took another step closer, each word cutting away the thin fabric of her innocence. "You didn't just poison a drink. You nearly killed your own father tonight." Gasps rippled again, and Homer staggered back, still holding the glass that minutes ago would have been mine. His wife clutched his arm, her eyes brimming with tears. "Wendy," Homer whispered, his voice breaking, "tell me it isn't true." Wendy shook her head violently. "No, he's twisting things. I was just helping with the drinks, that's all," Her words spilled out too quickly, the desperation in them louder than the denial. Dennis turned to her, his face pale and confused. "Wendy, why is Dad saying this? Did you really?" His voice cracked, unable to finish. "Of course not," she snapped, but the shrill pitch betrayed her. Her eyes flicked toward the wine glass still in Homer's hand, and then to the table where the other drinks rested. She knew the evidence sat there in plain sight. I raised my voice so every guest could hear. "We can settle this easily. We'll send the glass to a laboratory. If I'm wrong, I'll apologize to everyone here tonight. If I'm right," I gestured to the trembling crystal in Homer's hand, "then we all know what she intended." The moment those words left my lips, Wendy lunged. Her movements were clumsy but filled with panic. "No!" she shouted as her hand knocked the glass from Homer's grasp. It shattered against the stone terrace, red wine spreading like blood across the ground. The crowd recoiled. Some gasped, others cursed under their breath, but every eye fixed on Wendy now. No one believed her clumsy act was an accident. The timing was too perfect, too convenient. "Oh no," Wendy stammered, dropping to her knees, trying to pick up shards with trembling fingers. "I didn't mean to. I was just clumsy," I cut in coldly. "You destroyed the only proof that could have cleared your name or condemned you." The silence was damning. Every guest saw it. Every friend who had known me for decades understood the truth. Even Dennis stepped back from his wife, his expression torn between shock and dawning realization. "Wendy," he whispered almost to himself, "what have you done?" And in that single moment, her carefully crafted image as the perfect daughter-in-law crumbled before the very people she had tried to deceive. The terrace had fallen into stunned silence. Broken shards glittered under candlelight, the red wine bleeding across the stone like a crime scene. Guests exchanged uneasy glances, their celebrations soured into disbelief. Wendy crouched by the mess, her hands shaking as she tried to gather the pieces. Her mascara had begun to smear black streaks, marking the cracks in her polished mask. "That was no accident," I said firmly, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. "You destroyed the evidence because you knew exactly what a laboratory test would show." Martha Patterson spoke first, her voice trembling. "Wendy, we welcomed you into this circle tonight as family." She shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes. "And this is what you do." Wendy jumped to her feet, her tone defensive, bordering on shrill. "This is ridiculous. Lester's imagination has poisoned all of you more than any powder ever could. You've all known me for years. Do you really think I'd try to kill him in front of my own parents?" Her father's face twisted with pain, as if the words themselves stabbed him. Homer's voice cracked when he finally spoke. "I nearly drank that glass, Wendy. Your glass. Your poison." His hands trembled as Mai gripped his arm, tears streaming freely down her cheeks. The crowd's attention shifted to Dennis. He stood stiff, shoulders hunched, his gaze locked on his wife, as if seeing her for the first time. "Tell me he's wrong," he pleaded softly. "Tell me you didn't do this." "I didn't," she barked back, but the conviction was gone. Her words echoed into the night, hollow and unconvincing. The guests murmured among themselves, the shift in the air undeniable. Friends who had known me for decades, who had celebrated milestones and weathered storms with me, now looked at Wendy with disgust, their trust shattered. I took a step forward, the weight of 30 years of leadership settling on my shoulders. Wendy used Dennis's reconciliation as cover, I said, my voice carrying over the terrace. She smiled, charmed. "You played the part of a dutiful wife and daughter-in-law, all while plotting to kill me for my money." Gasps rose again, but this time no one doubted. Even Dennis recoiled from her, his hand falling limply to his side as if releasing her from his protection. his eyes clouded with a mix of shame and realization. Wendy spun in place, desperate, her eyes darting for escape routes. "This is insane," she shouted. "I don't have to stand here and be humiliated." She snatched her purse from a nearby chair, her heels striking the stone like hammers as she stormed toward the door. Dennis lingered only a moment, torn between loyalty to his wife and the truth everyone else had seen. But in the end, he followed her shoulders, slumped, his face ashen with disbelief. The sound of their car engine roared through the night, a final insult to the celebration that should have been flawless. I turned back to the guests, my voice softer now. "I'm sorry this night took such a turn, but you all deserved to see the truth." And though the party had fractured, I knew one thing with absolute certainty: Wendy's mask had been ripped away, and nothing would ever be the same. The echo of tires screeching away lingered in the night air long after Dennis and Wendy had gone. My guests shifted uneasily, whispering in clusters. The party atmosphere shattered like the wine glass on the terrace floor. I could feel their eyes on me, not in doubt, but in sympathy. Yet beneath their concern, I sensed something else: curiosity. People wanted answers, clarity, and justice. I owed them the truth, but I also knew Wendy wouldn't let this humiliation be the final chapter. I had seen her kind before in boardrooms and negotiations, people who thrived on control, who treated exposure not as defeat, but as a challenge. She had been caught tonight, but she wouldn't slink away quietly. She would fight back, claw at me, through Dennis, through whispers, through whatever schemes she could conjure. The attempted murder wasn't just about greed, it was about power. And when power-hungry people lose face, they come back swinging. "Lester," Jim Patterson said quietly, pulling me aside, "you've got to protect yourself. Don't let her spin this. Tonight everyone here saw what she did, but tomorrow she'll deny it. She'll twist it. She'll make you the villain." His words struck deep. Already, I could picture Wendy painting me as paranoid, an old man drunk on retirement champagne, inventing accusations. She would claim the glass broke by accident, that I imagined the powder, that grief over my late wife or stress from the company's sale had made me unstable. And Dennis, still blinded by the remnants of loyalty, might just believe her. I looked around the terrace at my guests. Martha Patterson dabbed her eyes with a napkin. Dr. Chen shook her head in quiet disbelief. Frank Morrison muttered something about good lawyers. They had all witnessed her slip, her desperation, her clumsy attempt to destroy evidence. But was that enough to withstand the storm she was about to unleash? I straightened my shoulders and tapped my glass lightly, regaining the room's attention. "Friends," I began, "I won't pretend this evening turned out how I planned. But I need you all to remember what you saw. You witnessed her attempt to silence the truth. Tonight wasn't about a misunderstanding. It was about greed, calculated, ruthless greed. And I promise you, I will not let it destroy me." A murmur of agreement swept through the crowd, but even as I spoke, I knew the harder battle was just beginning. Wendy wouldn't attack me openly. No, she would wage her war in shadows, through Dennis, through gossip, through subtle threats designed to corrode my reputation. She had lost the first round, but her counterattack was already brewing. As the guests slowly drifted back into cautious conversations, I caught sight of Homer and Mai, still pale and shaken, whispering between themselves. Their daughter had nearly killed me, and by extension, nearly killed them. The shame on their faces was unbearable. They too would feel her wrath in ways they hadn't yet imagined. I raised my chin and forced a smile for the guests who remained. But inside I steeled myself. Tonight I had survived her first strike. Tomorrow I would face her revenge. The morning after the party, I expected exhaustion to weigh me down. Instead, I woke to a storm. My phone buzzed endlessly, calls, messages, emails. At first I thought they were from concerned friends checking on me. But no. They were whispers turned to daggers already cutting at my reputation. One message read, "He accused his daughter-in-law of poisoning him in front of everyone. Poor man must be losing his mind." Another said, 32 million makes people paranoid. Lester's seeing shadows where there are none. Wendy had wasted no time. She had flipped the story before the sun rose, painting herself as the victim of an old man's delusion. I sat at the kitchen table, coffee cooling in my hand as I read each message. My name was being twisted into something ugly, unstable, bitter, incapable of joy even in triumph. Wendy knew exactly where to strike. If she couldn't kill me physically, she would strangle me socially, ruin my credibility, so no one would believe me if I spoke again. By mid-morning, Dennis called. His voice was raw, caught between anger and shame. "Dad, what you did last night was humiliating. You accused Wendy of attempted murder in front of everyone. Do you know how insane that sounds, Dennis?" I said carefully, "You saw her destroy that glass. You saw her panic when I stopped Homer. You can't tell me none of that registered." He hesitated just long enough for me to know the doubt was still alive in him. But then Wendy's influence came pouring through his words. She told me she was nervous that she knocked it over by mistake. Everyone's clumsy sometimes. And you've been under so much stress lately. Maybe you imagined more than what actually happened. There it was. The seed she had planted in his mind. I felt my chest tighten, but I refused to let anger take control. I didn't imagine anything, and the people at that party didn't either. They saw her face. They saw her desperation. If you keep choosing to close your eyes one day, she won't just come for me, she'll drag you down too. He muttered something under his breath, then hung up before I could answer. The silence that followed was heavier than any words. My son wasn't ready to face the truth. By noon, I learned Wendy had already been calling guests individually. Apologies flowed from her lips, sweet and rehearsed. She painted me as a tired old man overwhelmed by the sale of his company, mixing alcohol with stress, until I lashed out unfairly. She claimed she had stumbled, embarrassed herself, and then suffered the cruelty of a false accusation. And some people who had toasted me hours before were starting to question. That was Wendy's counterattack, not a knife, not a powder, but whispers sharp enough to wound deeper than steel. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the morning light spilling through the window. I had survived the poison in my glass. Now I had to survive the poison in her words. The whispers spread faster than wildfire. By Monday morning, I received a call from Frank Morrison, the banker, who had stood by me for decades. His tone was cautious, too formal for a man who once toasted with me until sunrise. "Lester," he began, "I heard some troubling things about Saturday. Some folks are saying you accused Wendy without proof, that you're seeing things." I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles whitened. "Frank, you were there. You saw her lunge for that glass. You saw her destroy the evidence." There was a pause, the kind that spoke louder than words. "I saw a glass fall," he said slowly. "But Lester, people make mistakes. I don't want to believe she'd do something so dark." And there it was, the sliver of doubt Wendy had engineered. She knew that not everyone caught the small details I had. She knew how easily panic could be mistaken for clumsiness. And now she was using that thin veil to cover her tracks, painting me as the bitter old man, tarnishing his own celebration with wild accusations. I ended the call politely, but inside my stomach churned. The attack wasn't about proving her innocence. It was about eroding my credibility until no one trusted me. I could almost hear her rehearsed lines. "He's been under so much stress. The sale, his age, the champagne, it all got to him." Later that afternoon, Dr. Chen, my longtime physician, stopped by unannounced. She sat at my kitchen table, her expression gentle but wary. "Lester," she said softly, "are you feeling all right? Stress can do strange things to the mind. Hallucinations, paranoia even." My chest tightened. Even she, Sarah, you've known me for 20 years. Do I sound paranoid now? Or do I sound like a man who saw someone try to poison him? She held my gaze, conflicted. "I want to believe you, but you must understand Wendy and Dennis are telling people you mixed medication with alcohol, that you collapsed into delusion." The fury that burned in me was cold, not hot, calculated. Wendy wasn't just smearing me, she was building a narrative brick by brick where I was the unreliable one, the fragile retiree unraveling after success. If she succeeded, then even if I shouted the truth from the rooftops, no one would listen. When she couldn't kill me with powder, she chose to kill me with perception. And in some ways, this weapon was more dangerous. Because once a man's reputation is gone, he is already half buried. I walked Dr. Chen to the door, thanking her for her concern, though inside I was already strategizing. Let Wendy whisper all she wanted. Let her paint me as weak, unstable, paranoid. Because the more she built that story, the harder her fall would be when I revealed the truth. I had survived worse storms in businessmen with more resources and sharper knives than Wendy. And just as I had done before, I would gather proof, wait for the right moment, and strike back. Quietly, decisively. By Tuesday, Wendy's counterattack had sharpened into something crueler. A neighbor dropped by to check on me, her words dripping with pity rather than warmth. "We just wanted to make sure you're okay, Lester," she said softly, her eyes scanning me as if searching for cracks. "Wendy told us you've been under so much strain since the sale. She's worried about you, worried about me." The hypocrisy nearly made me laugh. The woman who tried to slip poison into my glass now portrayed herself as the dutiful daughter-in-law concerned for the mental health of her aging father figure. And the worst part, people were buying it. That afternoon, my lawyer Harold called. "Lester, I don't mean to alarm you, but Dennis reached out to me. He hinted that you might not be in the right frame of mind to manage your new fortune. He even asked about guardianship options." I froze the phone hot against my ear. Guardianship. They weren't just spreading rumors, they were laying the groundwork to strip me of control over my own estate. If Dennis filed a petition claiming I was mentally incompetent, and Wendy supported it with her fabricated narrative, a judge might believe them. Suddenly, the $32 million I had earned could become a cage instead of freedom. "Harold," I said firmly, "you know me better than that. Do I sound incompetent to you?" "No," he admitted, his tone heavy with caution. "But these things can get messy. If they gather affidavits from people willing to say you've been erratic, it could be trouble." After hanging up, I sat in the quiet of my study, the contracts spread before me like a reminder of both triumph and danger. Wendy hadn't just come for my life, she was coming for my legacy. If poisoning me didn't work, she'd assassinate my character and take everything while I still breathed. The weight of betrayal pressed harder when I thought of Dennis. My son. The boy who once dreamed of working by my side, who used to fall asleep on my lap as I reviewed reports late into the night. Now he was complicit in a scheme to paint me as incapable, all because his wife whispered promises of fortune into his ear. But beneath the sting of betrayal, clarity began to form. Wendy had overplayed her hand. Poison was one thing, it could be dismissed as paranoia without proof. But a legal move to strip me of competence that required lies on paper signatures, testimonies, and paper trails could be traced. Lies could be exposed. I leaned back the leather chair, creaking, and allowed a small, grim smile. She thought she was clever, but by escalating her attack, Wendy had given me exactly what I needed, a path to prove her malice. The next battle wouldn't be fought with whispers over wine. It would be fought in the open, where her lies could be laid bare for everyone to see. By Wednesday, the storm had reached its peak. Rumors swirled through the community like dry leaves in the wind. Friends called with hesitation in their voices, neighbors looked at me with guarded pity, and even business acquaintances whispered doubts about my stability. Wendy had succeeded in planting suspicion. She wanted me isolated, discredited, weakened before her next move. That evening, I sat alone in my study, the leather folder of contracts spread open on the desk. $32 million, proof of my life's work. Yet it felt like a target painted across my back. I replayed Saturday night in my mind, her hand tipping powder into my glass, the frantic lunge to shatter the evidence, the look in her eyes when I stopped Homer. No, I wasn't crazy. I wasn't senile. I was a man who had seen the truth, even if others chose not to. The sound of tires crunching on gravel outside pulled me from my thoughts. Through the blinds, I saw Dennis's BMW parked in the driveway. My heart tightened. When he entered, his face was drawn, weary. "Dad," he began, his voice low. "Wendy says you're trying to ruin her. She says you hate her, that you're twisting everything." I gestured for him to sit. "Dennis, listen to me. I don't hate Wendy. But I saw her put something in my drink. I saw her try to cover it up. She didn't just put me at risk, she almost killed her own father." He shifted uncomfortably, his eyes flickering with conflict. "She told me you imagined it. That you were drunk, overwhelmed. People say he stopped himself, but the words hung in the air. People say, you're not well." I leaned forward, my voice steady. "Son, look me in the eyes. Do I seem like a man who's lost his grip, or do I seem like a man who built something from nothing, who has always told you the truth even when it hurt?" His gaze faltered, but he didn't answer. "Wendy loves me," he muttered finally. "She wouldn't." His voice trailed off, weak and unconvincing. I exhaled slowly. He wasn't ready. The web Wendy had spun around him was still too tight. But I saw a crack, a hesitation, a flicker of doubt. And doubt was enough. After he left, I stood at the window watching his taillights disappear into the night. I realized then that Wendy's counterattack had reached its limit. She had smeared me, tried to make me look unhinged, and now she was pushing Dennis to take legal action against his own father. But in doing so, she had overextended herself. Every lie required more lies to hold it up, and sooner or later, those lies would collapse under their own weight. I closed the leather folder with deliberate care. If Wendy wanted war, she would have it, but not on her terms. The next move would be mine, and it would be the one that ended this once and for all. By the end of that week, I knew waiting was no longer enough. Wendy had escalated from whispers to outright schemes, pushing Dennis toward legal guardianship and trying to paint me as incompetent. If I stayed silent, she'd strangle my reputation and tighten her grip on my son until he couldn't tell truth from lies. It was time for me to act, not with anger, but with the precision that had built an empire from scratch. I called Harold, my attorney, and asked him to meet me at the office first thing Monday morning. "Bring every document," I told him. "We're going to make sure my estate is protected before Dennis or Wendy file anything." He understood immediately. After decades in business, Harold knew the look in my eyes. I wasn't asking for advice, I was preparing for war. Over the weekend, I started gathering allies. I called Jim Patterson, my oldest friend, and asked him to write a statement about what he saw at the party, the panic in Wendy's eyes, the deliberate way she smashed the glass. I called Martha, Dr. Chen, even Frank Morrison, and asked them to put their impressions in writing. Some hesitated, not wanting to be dragged into family drama, but enough agreed. Piece by piece, I built the foundation of a case that Wendy couldn't spin away. Sunday night, I sat on the terrace alone, the same place where she had tried to poison me. The candles had burned out, the tables were gone, but the memory lingered, the glint of powder, the red stain of spilled wine, the collective gasp when I stopped Homer's hand. I replayed it, not to torture myself, but to remind myself why I couldn't waver. Wendy hadn't just threatened me. She had threatened everything I had built, everyone I cared about. As the night deepened, I thought about Dennis. My heart ached for the boy. He once was the one who used to draw crayon sketches of office buildings and tell me he'd be my partner someday. Now he was a man caught in a web he didn't even realize was spun around him. But I couldn't rescue him by shielding him from truth. Sometimes the only way to save someone is to let them feel the burn of the fire they're standing in. When dawn broke, I felt a calm I hadn't known in weeks. The plan was set. I would not just defend myself, I would expose Wendy for what she truly was. I would use the very tools she had tried to turn against me: law, evidence, and public truth. For the first time since signing those contracts, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. Retirement wouldn't begin with silence or surrender. It would begin with clarity, with a final blow that left no room for her to crawl back into the shadows. Monday morning, I walked into Harold's office with the same composure I used to carry into high-stakes negotiations. I wasn't there as a frightened old man fighting rumors. I was there as the founder of King Technologies, a man who had battled giants and won. Harold rose from his chair, his brow furrowed. "Lester, I've reviewed the situation. If Dennis files for guardianship, it will get messy. But if we act first, we can shut this down before it begins." I nodded, laying the folder of witness statements on his desk. These are from people who were at the party. They saw her panic, her desperation, her so-called clumsiness. They're willing to testify. Harold's eyes lit with approval as he scanned the pages. "This changes everything. We'll draft an affidavit, secure your assets in a trust only you control, and preempt any guardianship claim. If they try, they'll face a wall of evidence." For hours, we worked side by side. Harold filed documents that locked down my accounts, ensured my medical directives were in place, and secured my estate in a way Dennis and Wendy couldn't touch. Every signature I penned felt like driving a nail into the coffin of her scheme. Wendy thought she could strip me of control by spinning lies. Instead, I was building an iron fortress around my life's work. By noon, I felt a quiet satisfaction. But Harold wasn't finished. "Lester, you could also pursue charges. Attempted poisoning, destruction of evidence, it's serious. The authorities won't ignore it." I leaned back in my chair, considering. Bringing in the law meant headlines, investigations, public spectacle. Did I want my retirement defined by a courtroom drama? But then I pictured Homer's trembling hands, the glass inches from his lips, the tears in Mai's eyes. Wendy hadn't just endangered me, she nearly killed her own father. That demanded accountability. "File the report," I said firmly. "If she wanted to play this in the shadows, then we'll drag it into the light." That evening, I returned home to find a new message blinking on my phone. It was Dennis. His voice was tense, defensive, yet tinged with uncertainty. "Dad, Wendy says you're trying to ruin her life. She says you went to the police. Tell me that's not true." I let the machine finish recording before I answered. "Son, I didn't ruin her life. She did. And the sooner you see that, the sooner you'll be free too." Hanging up, I stood at the window, the city skyline glowing in the distance. Wendy thought she had cornered me with whispers and manipulation. But now the board was reset. I had the law, the truth, and the will to fight. She had only lies and desperation. And in the long run, that was never enough. 2 days after filing the report, the knock came. Not at my door, but at Wendy's. I didn't need to be there to picture the scene. The police would have arrived in unmarked cars, polite but firm, their presence impossible to ignore. Neighbors peeking through curtains, whispers spreading before the sunset. Wendy had tried to poison me in secret, but now the accusation was public official, undeniable. That afternoon, Homer called. His voice was raw, broken. "Lester, they questioned us. They asked if we noticed anything unusual at the party. Do you know how hard it was to tell them the truth, to admit my own daughter might have tried to kill you and nearly killed me instead?" My heart ached for him. He was an honorable man, and this wasn't his shame to bear. "Homer," I said gently, "you didn't fail as a father. She made her choices, but your honesty may save lives, including Dennis's." Silence stretched across the line. Then his voice cracked. "Thank you for stopping me from drinking that glass. I owe you my life." After we hung up, I sat back in my chair, staring at the city lights flickering through the window. It wasn't triumph I felt, but clarity. Wendy's mask had slipped, and now she was exposed not just to friends and neighbors, but to the law itself. Still, I knew she wouldn't surrender easily. People like her rarely did. By Wednesday, Dennis showed up at my door. His shoulders slumped, his face pale, his usual bravado gone. "Dad, what are you doing?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Wendy says you're trying to destroy her, that you've turned everyone against her." I met his eyes, steady and calm. "No, Dennis, she did that herself. I'm only shining a light on what she tried to do." He shook his head, torn between love and truth. "She swears she didn't mean anything. She said she panicked, that you misunderstood." I stepped closer, my voice firm but not unkind. "Tukaktani." I watched her pour it in. I watched her smash the glass to hide it. Ask yourself, why would she do that if it was nothing? Why would your own mother-in-law's tears tell you a different story than hers? His lips trembled, and for the first time I saw cracks in his blind loyalty. "I don't know what to believe anymore," he whispered. "Then believe what you saw," I replied. Not her words, not her excuses. What you saw with your own eyes. He left soon after, no threats, no accusations, just silence, heavy and uncertain. I knew the war inside him had begun, and Wendy's grip on him was loosening. That night, I poured myself a glass of Bordeaux, the same year I'd founded King Technologies. I raised it alone, not in celebration, but in resolve. Wendy had tried to kill me with poison, then with lies. But now with the law closing in, and Dennis beginning to doubt her, her empire of deceit was crumbling. And I would be there to watch it fall. By the weekend, Wendy's world was unraveling. Word of the police inquiry spread quickly, and the whispers she once used to undermine me now circled back to her. Neighbors who once admired her charm avoided her on the street. Friends who had been quick to accept her polished hospitality now crossed the road to escape eye contact. It was remarkable how quickly people distanced themselves when a mask slipped. But I knew better than to assume victory too soon. A cornered fox is the most dangerous, and Wendy, for all her elegance and calculated smiles, was nothing more than that cornered, desperate, unpredictable. Saturday evening, as I reviewed paperwork Harold had prepared to secure my estate, the phone rang. It was Jim Patterson again. "Lester," he said, his voice edged with concern. "Wendy's been calling people. She's spinning this as a vendetta. Says you want to ruin Dennis by destroying his wife. She's painting herself as the innocent caught in your bitterness." I sighed. "Jim, I expected as much. But let her talk. The more she lies, the more tangled she becomes. And when the truth lands, there will be no escape." Later that night, I received a text from Dennis' dad. "Wendy wants to meet. She says we can work this out privately. Please, just hear her out." I stared at the message for a long time. Work it out privately. In other words, silence the accusations, bury the evidence, pretend none of it happened. It was exactly what Wendy needed, a quiet deal that let her walk away untarnished while leaving me vulnerable. No. This wasn't just about protecting myself anymore. This was about making sure she could never do this again to me or anyone else. I replied with 3 words, only with witnesses. The next afternoon, Dennis and Wendy arrived at my house. I had already asked Jim and Harold to be present. The 4 of us sat in the living room, the air heavy with tension. Wendy wore her charm like armor, her smile soft and practiced. "Lester," she began sweetly, "this has all been a terrible misunderstanding." I was nervous at the party. I fumbled. And now rumors have grown into something ugly. Her words floated in the air, smooth as honey, but her eyes betrayed her. They darted toward Harold's folder of documents, toward Jim's steady glare. She wasn't here for reconciliation. She was here to negotiate survival. "You smashed the only glass that could prove you innocent," I said evenly. That wasn't a fumble. That was fear. And every witness in this room knows it. Her smile faltered. Dennis shifted uncomfortably beside her, his loyalty crumbling under the weight of reality. "You want to bury this?" I continued. "You want me to pretend nothing happened? You nearly killed your own father that night. You nearly destroyed my son along with me. You will face the truth, Wendy. One way or another." Her mask cracked at last. The charm vanished, replaced by raw, seething hatred. She knew the walls were closing in, and for the first time she had no words to twist her way out. The silence in my living room was thick, broken only by the faint hum of the grandfather clock. Wendy sat stiffly on the couch, her hands clenched in her lap, eyes darting like a trapped animal. Dennis shifted beside her, his jaw tight, his confidence gone. Across from them, Jim leaned forward, arms crossed, while Harold flipped through the documents with deliberate calm. "You think you can destroy me?" Wendy spat finally, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You'll ruin your own son in the process. Do you really want that, Lester?" I met her glare without flinching. "No, Wendy. I want to save my son from you. He deserves better than a life chained to your schemes." Dennis opened his mouth to protest, but faltered, his eyes darting between us. I could see the cracks spreading. For the first time, he wasn't sure if defending her was worth it. Harold cleared his throat, placing a folder on the coffee table. "Mrs. King, the police investigation is already underway. Witness statements have been submitted. If you continue to deny, that is your right. But the evidence, your actions at the party, the glass you deliberately smashed, the testimony of over a dozen guests, it all points in one direction." Wendy's face twisted. She had built her power on charm, on manipulation, on whispering lies that others were too polite to question. But charm couldn't bend hard evidence, and lies couldn't erase what so many had seen with their own eyes. Jim leaned in, his voice like a hammer. "You tried to poison a man in front of his friends, and when you failed, you nearly let your father take the drink instead. Do you realize how close he came to dying that night?" For a moment, Wendy's mask slipped entirely. Her bravado crumbled, leaving nothing but raw fear. She dropped her gaze to the floor, her shoulders sagging. But then, like a cornered fox, she lashed out again. "Fine. You think you have me cornered? You'll regret this, Lester. You'll regret dragging me into the light." I stood, my voice steady as stone. "No, Wendy. The only regret I carry is that I let you into this family at all. But that ends today. You wanted my fortune, my reputation, even my life. Instead, you've lost everything, and the world will know it." Dennis pressed his palms to his face, his shoulders shaking, not in anger, but in shame. He finally saw the truth, though it had come too late to stop the damage. As Wendy stormed out, her heels striking the floor like gunshots, I felt a wave of calm wash over me. It wasn't triumph or gloating, it was clarity. The fight was no longer about survival, it was about restoration. She had tried to strip me of my dignity, but in the end, she had stripped herself of everything that mattered. And as the door slammed behind her, I knew the final blow had landed. Retirement was supposed to be my reward after 32 years of sacrifice. Instead, it became a battlefield where I discovered the darkest truths about family greed and survival. Wendy thought she could end my life with a packet of powder, and when that failed, she tried to bury me with lies. But in the end, she exposed herself. Her mask of charm shattered, her schemes collapsed, and even Dennis, my own son, couldn't protect her from the truth. That night taught me something every parent and grandparent should remember. Love is not measured in money, and silence in the face of betrayal only feeds it. I had spent years believing that blood was unbreakable, but I learned that real family is chosen through loyalty, respect, and honesty. Homer and Mai, who nearly lost everything because of their daughter's greed, showed me more grace than the woman who married into my family ever did. If you're watching this, and you've ever felt betrayed by those closest to, you know this: you are not alone and you are not powerless. Justice may not always come quickly, but with patience and truth, it will come. Tell me, have you ever faced a betrayal that cut as deep as mine? How did you handle it? And what did you learn from it? Share your story in the comments. I want to hear from you. And if this story spoke to you, please like, subscribe, and share. Thank you for listening.